Hope everyone's doing well today. Thanks for joining us on this Friday. Before we get started, any questions or anything that you guys have on your mind that you want to talk about? We let a few more people get on. Good morning, Jeanette. See your text. Okay. No questions right now. We'll just jump into what I've got. Today we're going to talk all things seller's disclosures. Had a few questions this week on seller's disclosures, but also just wanted to go through them real quick because that's something that's really important for us as listing agents and even the buying side to know what we're expecting. So I'm going to share with you a couple of things. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about is this is the part in the REPC that talks specifically about seller's disclosures, section 7. No later than the seller's disclosure deadline referenced in section 24A, seller shall provide the buyer the following documents in hard copy or electronic format, which are collectively referred to as the seller's disclosures. So from the listing side of it, seller's disclosures consists of all of these things, not just the actual disclosures that we're going to dive into a little deeper today. It consists of everything on this list. So before that deadline, you want to make sure you're getting those covered. If you're the listing agent, you want to make sure you have those, especially if the buyer, the offer comes in and they give you 1 or 2 days to have your seller's disclosures done. Make sure you have everything ready to go. Otherwise, you could run into a problem where the seller does not perform on this. And the challenge is that this is really the responsibility of the agent to make sure that the client knows this is what they need, because my guess is that there's nobody out there who's not full-time real estate that could name every single one of these things that they need to disclose. So it's our responsibility as agents to make sure that happens. If for some reason we don't make it happen and the seller is in default and the buyer pursues that default, I can almost guarantee that seller's not going to be very happy with you and could actually come after us for neglecting some of those responsibilities. So make sure that you look through this. Make sure you look at the deadlines as you go. A written property condition disclosure for the property completed, signed, and dated by the seller is provided in section 10.3. That's what we're going to actually spend most of the time on. I'm not going to go through every single one of these today. We've done that before. We can go through specific questions, but I wanted to go through the actual disclosures today so you can kind of see some of the questions that I have on there. One question I had this week was the seller's disclosures deadline was today, and the seller got them over here today. Do I need to, as a buyer's agent, do I need to have them signed and back to the seller by this date? The deadline is for the seller to get them to you, and then you review them and have them back to the seller before the end of due diligence deadline. So yes, you want to look at them, you want to get them signed, but there isn't a deadline for you to sign them as far as linked to the seller's disclosures deadline, where it is required that the seller gets them to you by that deadline. So hopefully that makes sense. If you represent the buyer, just review them. Your job is to review them during the due diligence period and sign them and get them back. Okay, so I'm going to go into the property, seller's property condition disclosure. Now it's 16 pages, or it's 12 pages long. I'm not going to go through every single section of it because that would just take way too long. So if there's specific questions as we go through, just stop me and then we'll talk more about it. The biggest thing here is the only thing on this whole form that you as an agent should be filling out is right here, the seller's name, the property address, and the seller's brokerage. That's the only thing that as an agent you should be filling out. There's lots of reasons why a seller doesn't want to fill them out or can't fill them out. But taking on the liability of you filling them out is not something that I would recommend, or as a brokerage, we're going to want you to do at all. Biggest thing here, anytime they put bold, I usually like to read this to my client just so they know, but seller is obligated under law and under the REPC section 7A, which is what we just read, regardless of occupancy, to disclose to the buyers defects in the property and the facts known to the seller that materially and adversely affect the use and value of the property that cannot be discovered by a reasonable inspection by an ordinary prudent buyer. Okay, so a couple things to unpack on this one. Okay, first, this first section here, seller is obligated under law. Okay, there is a state law in Utah that sellers have to provide seller's disclosures to buyers. They have to disclose what they know about a property to a buyer when they're doing a transaction. So that's an actual law that the state has. Then the next section is under the REPC section 7A. So in our contract, we have, it specifically says that we're going to provide those for them. So I get this question quite a bit. I have an investor or the home was a family members, they died, we're selling the estate, we've never lived in the home, we don't know anything about the home, we don't have anything to do with that. The biggest challenge is that you can still do seller's disclosures without living in the property, because it's asking you what you know about the property. And if you don't know anything about the property, still filling out the seller's disclosures is still going to satisfy this rule. So we have a tendency to put in the contract that seller hasn't lived in the home and will not provide seller's disclosures. The thing I want to make sure that we are looking at is this first sentence that I just talked about, is you're removing it from section 7A, saying I'm not going to provide it. But it's really hard for us as agents to go against the law and saying that we have to provide these. So just be really careful when you're trying to remove them from your contract, that you're not trying to change state law, because one, we're not authorized to do that in the first place. And if there ever was a problem, the state law is going to be held up faster than us as a professional writing an addendum. So just be cautious with that. It does remove it from the REPC, which is better than not removing it at all, because it does specifically say we don't want it in the REPC. We're not going to provide it. However, I would just say there's not very many scenarios where you shouldn't be able to provide it, even if they haven't lived in the property. In fact, I could go over and fill out seller's disclosures on Russ's property right now, and I've never even been in the house. So I can fill it out and I can provide it. So don't make that your reasoning behind it. Okay, and then the object here is to disclose the buyer's defects in the property and the facts known to the seller that are materially, and this is the part that I want to emphasize, materially and adversely affect the use and value of the property. So the biggest thing here is if something in the property would affect the value of the property or a decision that a buyer has to move forward, if that's not disclosed after the fact, this is the part where a seller can get themselves in trouble. The seller, they're selling the home as is, but if you don't disclose it, if they come back and they are saying, hey, this is something that would have made a difference in our decision to buy this property, we would have asked for more, a cheaper price, we would have backed out of the property, any one of those reasons. If that is the case and the seller knew about it, that could open up liability to the seller. So anything material and adversely affecting the value of the property. Now this part right here, that cannot be discovered by a reasonable inspection by an ordinary prudent buyer. Okay, so this, sometimes we look at it as, you know, get out of jail free card, as far as like, well, somebody could have seen that. I wouldn't rely on that. I would try to disclose everything you know every time. If your client asks you, should you disclose something, your automatically answer from now on should be, yes, disclose it. Just disclose. If they ask you if you should disclose it, your answer as an agent is yes, there's nothing wrong with disclosing it. In fact, the more you disclose, the better off you're going to be. In fact, Russ was telling me a story once. I don't know if he shared it in here, but he had I think it was an attorney friend who was selling their property. The buyer came in and said they're not doing a due diligence. They're not going to do any inspections. So he filled out his seller's disclosures as yes on everything. He knows something's wrong somewhere, so that if it ever came up, they couldn't come back and say you didn't disclose it, because he said, yep, I said there was probably a potential problem. So just be aware of that. This disclosure is designed to assist the seller in complying with the disclosure requirements. Okay, so we're required to disclose it. This is just to help them in that process. And as you can see, there's lots of different questions. So I'm just going to go through each section. I'll pause for a half second just in case you guys have questions on them. And there's a couple of them that I'll kind of chime in and just give you a couple thoughts. But when you look at it, it's pretty, there shouldn't be a lot of confusion. If it's grayed out, there's nothing you're going to put in there. It's on the left side. If there's check boxes, you want to check one of the boxes. If it's not applicable, you're going to check NA. You'll be filling out sides on the left and the right. So ownership, I didn't see anything that was out of the ordinary. Haven't had too many questions on that. If you have questions on them, let me know. 2, additions, remodels, completions. That's pretty self-explanatory. Use of property. This is one that I wanted to bring up because this is one that I have talked to an agent just a couple of weeks ago, that there's a buyer and a seller that are now getting into legal action because of this. Are you aware of any existing or threatened legal actions against the property? Okay, so a lot of times we look at it and say, has my HOA been in a legal, are they currently in a legal battle? And then the answer is no, they're not currently in a legal battle. But this section right here is the one I wanted to bring up, is or threatened legal action to the property. Because what happened in this scenario was the HOA was going to be suing, I think it was the builder for it. They were going to, they've been talking about in their minutes, they've been doing everything. Well, what happened was the seller did not disclose that. They said there was no legal action. They said their unit wasn't part of a legal action. And then they closed and went on. And then the buyer came to find out that they are in legal, they are pursuing it. They filed a lawsuit, and now it's causing some problems for the buyer. So now they're going back for the seller. And as you can see, that's probably not a fun position to be in, especially for the agents involved with that. So just be aware of that one. Use of property. The roof, pretty self-explanatory. Natural gas, electric, phone, internet, what they know about it. Are there any problems with it? Culinary water, this is one I see a lot of mistakes on because it says check the applicable boxes. Okay, they're referring to these boxes here. The orange is different subcategories. So it's typically one of them. It's not all of them. So if you see one where it's checked at the top here, this one's checked, and then this side is filled out, or this section right here up here is filled out, but the bottom section is not, then I wouldn't be too concerned because it's over this whole section. So if this is all blank down here, but it does tell you what it is, they're disclosing what they have. You could also see it where they're checked and you have NA over here, but really it's saying check the one that below. Irrigation, secondary water, same thing. It's check one of the applicable boxes. So you could see this, just one of those checked as well. Septic tank, heating and cooling, equipment. Here's one that I wanted to bring up here. Is any of the equipment in place on the property listed in section 10A not owned by the seller, leased, or the tenant? So it's talking about this stuff in here: 10A, purifier, audio system, sprinkling, smoke detectors, TV, antennas. This is the stuff that if they're leased or you know, they've rented them, they're not going to stay in the property. you'll want to, though, you want to make sure they're disclosed here. The ones I see the most, water purifying, water softeners. A lot of times you can not own those, but have them in there. TV antennas, like dishes on the house, like satellite dishes and stuff like that. That's
Jason?
stuff that when you own them or you don't own them, you want to make sure you're disclosing that. That came into a play with this number 11, appliances. Are any of the appliances in the place of the property listed in section 11 not owned by the seller? So this came up probably a year ago where a home owner sold the property. We represented the listing agent, sold the property, and in the basement was it was another unit. So there was kind of a mother-in-law down there. Well, come to find out, the mother-in-law's kitchen, refrigerator, and appliances down there were actually owned by the tenant, not by the owner. So when they moved out, the buyer obviously was upset at that, said, we asked that you included all the refrigerators, and we asked that you did the washers and dryers, and you said yes. Well, come to find out that those ones were not owned by the seller. And so you can't, as a seller, you can't just sell somebody else's fridge. So in that case, the seller, the tenant could take their appliances, but you also got a buyer who's very upset and saying, hey, you were supposed to, these were supposed to be there. So that's where this is supposed to be disclosed. So if you have somebody who's got a mother-in-law apartment and there's, don't just assume that the fridge is theirs and it's not the tenant's, because it could very well be not their property. That causes some problems. Fireplace and stoves, interior features, exterior features. Most of these are written so they're pretty easy to understand.
Jason?
I think the confusion comes in when you look at 12 pages and say, I don't want to read 12 pages. And so that's usually where the confusion is. It's not reading through it. Termites, dry rot, pests.
Hello?
Did you have a question?
I do.
I think, yeah, Lisa.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear. So let's say you were going to Russ's house and you didn't know anything. Just give me an example how you would fill out, or would you just say no on some of these? How would you fill this out if you are either the investor or you've never lived in the property or you're at Russ's house?
Yeah, so let's just take, since we're right here on 15, let's just take this one. Are you aware of any past or present problems with termites, dry rot, rodents, or pests on or affecting the property? My answer is no, I'm not aware of any of those.
Okay.
So remember that you're just disclosing what you know. So let's give you the hypothetical. Let's say that the buyer moves in and then they come back and they say, your house is full of termites, right? And like, obviously, you didn't disclose that you knew that. And I come back and say, well, I've never lived in the property. I told you exactly what I knew. And if that's the case, if I really truly don't know the answer to that, then I'm not going to be liable for having to disclose that because I don't really know. Now, if I'm, this is one I see a lot where an investor says, well, I've never lived in the property, but they go in the property and they've remodeled the whole thing and they fix the whole house up and they come back and they say, well, I didn't know about that. Well, you can show them, it says, well, you fixed this wall and you took this out and you took the floor out and it's right there. You should have seen that. You should have known that. That would be where the problem is. But if I was going into Russ's house, which I've never been, then I could be fine with just doing, no, I don't know anything about that one.
Okay. So that is still filled out to the best of their knowledge, whether they've lived there or not. And then that takes away all that liability of just blanketing saying, we've never lived in the property, so we're not going to supply disclosures.
Yeah, so there are some people that shorten these. This one is a an actual form that we should be using. I have seen brokerages make their own forms, which is a lot smaller. Personally, I think taking the extra time to go through every one of these questions and answering them is going to protect you and your client better than just doing a blanket statement that says, I don't know anything about the property. The other thing that I find is when somebody's lived in the home for a long time, if you say, well, what's wrong with my home? And you have to write everything down on a piece of paper that's wrong with your home, you're not going to remember every single thing. But if you're reading through these questions and it's asked you a specific question that you might not have been thinking of, it might trigger your memory of like, oh yeah, I do remember having the toilet flood and we had to fix some stuff underneath 7, 8 years ago. So I personally think that having everyone go through this longer form is a safer route than just doing an addendum that says, I've never lived in the home and I don't know anything about the home.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, 16 structural items, boundaries and easements. This is a big one that I see a lot of problems with when somebody knows their fence isn't in the right spot, but they don't disclose it. That can cause problems in the future. Electrical, mold. This question I get a lot of that says, hey, we found mold in the house, and they said there's no mold in the house. Unless there's evidence that somebody ripped open the wall and looked in the wall, they may not know that. So that's something that, if you have a buyer that's concerned about it, you might want to do mold testing or something like that. But if they don't know about it, but it still exists, if they really truly didn't know about it, they're going to be okay. But the example that I like to use for a roof says that the roof's leaking. The seller says, oh, the roof's never leaked. I didn't know there was a roof leak. And then the buyer goes up in the roof and there's a bucket in the roof collecting the water that was placed there by the seller. That would be something that they would be liable for not disclosing because there's evidence that says they knew about it. Other moisture conditions, hazardous material. This is a question Russ and I were talking about a little bit earlier this morning, that there was a home that had some kids that were smoking meth in the basement. This is where you're going to disclose. Are you aware of any past or present hazardous conditions in the property? Actually, that's section 21 below. Sorry. This one. Okay. 22, homeowners association. And then public infrastructure district. This is becoming more and more prevalent in Utah. So you just want to find out if that's in it. Basically what that is a certain portion of a city can be deemed part of this PID, which is that if they're creating some new infrastructure around there, then the participating parties have to pay it. The one that I know of right now that is kind of a big deal is the one that's in Provo, because they did a PID for the new medical building that they're building in Provo for the school. So you just want to make sure that if you are in one, you disclose that you are. A lot of places in Utah don't have them yet, but if they do have them, you want to make sure you're disclosing that. Unpaid assessments, insurance, energy efficiency, solar panels, that's always going to be an issue. There is an addendum specifically talking about solar panels. If you have solar panels, you should include that addendum in your REPC. Alternative power sources. And then this page 29, you can see it's really long. This is an area where you could please describe any additional material information that you are aware of, or please clarify any disclosures made above. So you're able to put more of the disclosures in there. If they're find something in here that they just can't write all of it on one line, you can put it down here on section 29 and you can disclose it. If they ask you if you should disclose it, the answer should always be yes. Hopefully you guys are understanding that. Then the last thing on this that I wanted to bring up is when you are signing this, this is verification of the seller. So the seller's signing it, but then the buyer is just acknowledging receipt of it. So I get this question a lot where the buyer's saying, well, I know they're lying. I've been in the house and their seller's disclosures are not even accurate. You can tell they didn't even fill them out. That's probably true, and it warrants asking the seller's agent to fix them and get you more information. But having your buyer sign this is not saying they agree to it. It's just saying that they're acknowledging they received it, is all that is. If in the transaction, this is where this typically comes up, if in the transaction, there is something that happens in the property, or your seller goes, oh, I totally forgot. This happened to our house. This is the proper form to use that. The addendum to the seller's property disclosures. You can have as many addendums of this as you need to make sure they're fully disclosed. You're gonna write the page number, the item, and explain what happened. So if something happened while in the transaction, you'll want to update your seller's disclosures just so that you're protected through the process. Okay, any questions on seller's disclosures? Hopefully that was thorough enough for you and not too boring. I know it's 12 pages. Actually, I think it used to be 16 pages, so they must have shortened it. But 12 pages, I would suggest having all of your clients go through them, even if they don't know a whole lot about the property. Okay, any other questions about that or anything else for today?
No, really clear. Thanks, Jason.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome. Have a wonderful weekend. Supposed to be a nice warm weekend before in our winter time. Warm winter for us. Enjoy. Thanks.